Hi, I'm Jennifer with Eversweet Apiaries, and today we're going to talk about swarming. What is swarming? Swarming is usually good for bees, but not for beekeepers. Swarming usually means the colony is thriving and so highly populated that they have outgrown their current home. Swarming is a natural, innate instinct and method of reproduction and survival. Not good for the beekeeper because bees make a new queen, which stays behind with a small amount of bees, and the majority of bees leave with the old queen and most of the honey. It can disrupt and decrease honey production, and depending on the time of year swarming occurs, can be detrimental to the parent colony and swarming colony if they don't find a suitable new home. Causes of swarming: overcrowding in the brood nest. There's not enough room for the queen to lay due to cells being used for brood and or cells filled with honey, nectar, or pollen in the brood nest. When the brood area becomes too filled with honey, we call that being honey bound. There's too many workers in the brood nest. There's foragers down in the brood area, and so that area becomes really congested with workers, foragers. There's not enough nice drawn comb for the queen to lay. There's a loss of queen pheromone. Older queens have less queen substance than younger queens. Large hive plus reduced pheromone will equal swarm preparation, and this is the importance of using young queens. They are less likely to swarm. Overheating. It's possible, but not likely, especially if you're using bottom screens in conjunction with top screens. The bees do a really good job of regulating the temperature inside of the hive. When foragers beard on the outside of the hive, it's due to temperatures getting too hot or too humid, especially in July and August. You'll see them hanging on the outside of the hive in the evenings. They do this so they won't overheat or cook the brood. And this is what bee bearding looks like. They're just all hanging out on the outside because they know if they all are inside, that their temperature, their body temperature, will cook the brood. So they go hang outside on the porch. The type of breed: some say Russians and Carnies are more prone to swarm. They tend to build up quicker, so this is not necessarily a bad thing. They just might need to be watched more carefully. When swarming occurs: spring is typically the time bees swarm more because of a more intense nectar flow and brood buildup. They are more inclined to swarm in spring because more of their survival conditions are met for the parent colony and swarming colony. There's ample food supply, population, and weather conditions, etc. The swarming colony really does not want to leave the parent colony hanging, and the swarming colony wants to have an ample food supply wherever they go. And so when both of these hives seem like the condition is met for each, then the swarming colony is going to be more inclined to leave the parent colony thinking, okay, you're going to be okay, you're going to be fine, we're going to find a new home. Bees can swarm at any time, even in late summer and beginning of fall, depending on weather variables, weather, foraging, hive strength, etc. They usually swarm in good weather and in the afternoon, but not always. There's been a lot of swarming happen recently. We've had a lot of rain, and so they will swarm even if it's cloudy, if it's drizzling, they can swarm then as well. This is an old saying: a swarm of bees in May is worth a bale of hay. A swarm of bees in June is worth a silver spoon, but a swarm in July is not worth a fly. And basically what this is saying is later in the season that they swarm, the swarm is not going to be very big. And it's also important to note that it's pretty much this law of the land that whoever collects the swarm, it's their bees. Whoever collects it, it could be your neighbor's bees. You know it's your neighbor's bees, but if you collect it, they are now your bees. Swarming behavior and warning signs. Swarm preparation begins 2 to 4 weeks before the first swarm issues. Warning signs: floor is abundant, a lot of pollen and nectar intake. Colony strong before and during a nectar flow. not a lot of open cells, and lots of capped brood. One frame of sealed brood will, when they emerge as adult bees, cover roughly 3 frames. Not only is the population about to explode, but the parent colony can recover its workers quickly after the swarm has left. So the swarm is thinking, okay, parent colony, you got a lot of bees. We're going to leave. You're going to be okay. More drones are often reared, and fewer eggs are laid by the queen. Backfilling occurs. This is what backfilling looks like. This is the capped brood that's in the center of the frame, and then you would have your pollen arch right here, and then the kept honey in the corner. So basically, it's a warning sign when your kept brood meets your capped honey here. And the bees are just trying to do some redundant work, and then they will remove the pollen and fill this with fresh nectar. There is a sudden or abundant production of queen cups or play cups, and you might see charged queen cell cups and swarm queen cells. Warning signs: swarm queen cells. They're usually at the bottom of the frames, but not always. Swarm cells will be many. This ensures that at least one of the virgin queens will emerge after swarming. When producing supersedure or emergency cells, only a few are made. Supersedure cells are generally the same age, while swarm cells vary in age. The first swarm queen cells made are given the best care and produce quality queens. So if you're interested in making queens off of any of those queen cells, then you want to pay particular attention to cells that are more well cared for. Backup cells are generally not as good or well cared for. Those of medium length and heavily dimpled, marbled are usually good. Any that are smooth and long are usually poor. So this one right here, they took really good care of this. They loved her. They fed her more. They really took better care of this queen. This one is long and smooth, so that's generally considered a poor queen. Let's talk about queen cups or play cups. Bees build these throughout the year. They build them and tear them down. I think they build them because they're bored. Yes, bees do get bored, especially when it's raining a lot. Italian bees seem to build these queen cups more. And here's another picture of queen cups. And this is a picture of a charged queen cup or queen cell. And so it's charged because they put an egg in there. So there's larvae now growing in there. So when you're doing your inspections, you will see these. And so it's always a good idea to look in there and see if it is indeed just a play cup or it's charged queen cup. And I just cut them out. I don't like seeing them, so I just cut them open, look in them, and get rid of them. These are different examples of queen cells, swarm cells. This was from Randy Oliver's site, and you can see that they are all down on the bottom of the frame here, and they are a little bit varying in age. These are also queen cells or swarm cells right here, and they're on the face of the comb, so that just goes to show you that they can put swarm cells on the face of the comb too. And there's lots of capped brood there, so that's definitely, an indication that this hive is getting ready to explode. And believe it or not, these are swarm cells too, and they are varying in age, but they built this for a different reason, probably because there was not enough good drawing comb there. This hasn't been drawn out yet. This is just foundation right there. Behavior. When queen cells are made, scouting for new sites may begin at this time. Scouts return and perform a dance similar to the waggle dance to indicate location of a new home. Charged queen cells are capped at 8 days. Workers feed the queen less. Her egg laying decreases and her abdomen decreases in weight so that she can fly better with the swarm. The workers also push and bite the queen, which forces her to keep moving. A lot of people think that the queen has a decision in this process of swarming. She does not want to swarm. She just wants to lay eggs all the time. It's the workers who actually get downright ignorant with her and force her to leave the colony. Depending on the weather, colonies usually swarm shortly after the first queen cell is capped. So remember, on the 8th day, the first queen cell that was formed, it gets capped 8 days. They can leave at that time. Workers may tear down cells to delay swarming if there's bad weather, rain, or they might lose the swarm impulse altogether if the nectar flow is over or if they go into a dearth. Workers will sometimes keep virgins trapped in their cells, and they could be heard piping at one another. So if it's raining, they're trying to delay the process. They won't let those virgins out of the cells. The field bees do less work and may congregate at the entrance or at the lower frames, but don't confuse that with bee bearding. Workers engorge with honey about 10 days prior to swarming, depending on when the swarm will leave. Supers are crowded with bees. These idle bees are usually filled with honey, which makes them appear large because of their distended abdomens. Right before swarming, the workers perform a word dance to motivate the colonies to leave the hive and swarm. The bees run in zigzags, whir their wings, and shake their bodies. The prime swarm contains young workers and a few drones. The swarm settles nearby, checking if the queen is present. Scout bees again search for a suitable new home. Swarms can remain in a temporary spot for a few hours or a few days. If the bees cannot agree on a suitable new home within 3 days, they're pretty much stuck in that position where they first collected. And you might see that all of this open comb in a tree. That means that they couldn't agree on a new spot, and they just had to make camp where they first collected. After swarms, secondary or caste swarms are likely. They might leave with a virgin queen. They are normally a smaller swarm that issues following the prime swarm, typically 10 to 15 days later. Hives can literally swarm themselves to death. So that's why it can be dangerous to let them go into swarm mode. A secondary swarms, they can also occur if they were not able to herd the old queen out in the prime swarm. So they'll go collect on a bush, a tree, wherever, and okay, did we get the queen? If they did not get her, she was slick, she got away from them, then they will go back in the hive and start the process all over again. Swarm prevention, control, and management. So what do all these terminologies mean? Swarm prevention is the steps taken by the beekeeper to reduce the chances of swarming before the visible signs are seen. Swarm control is the action taken after the visible signs of the colony intending to swarm are seen, like queen cells. Randy Oliver said, swarm management consists of somehow coaxing our colonies into storing honey beyond their needs rather than following their natural reproductive urges. Before swarming occurs, you need to decide what your swarm management or objectives will be. Do you want bees or do you want honey? Your decision will dictate your swarm control and prevention techniques. There's a fine line between running strong hives or honey production hives and keeping them from swarming. We always want to run our hives as strong colonies. That's the best defense against many different problems within a hive. Strong colonies can better defend themselves against many things, small hive beetles, mites, wax moths. And so it's really hard sometimes to keep them strong, but yet keep them from swarming at the same time. Swarm prevention. There are several methods which can be time-consuming and risky. I'm not going to go into real depth with these, but you can do your own research if you'd like on them. One is called the DeMore method, checkerboarding, replacing brood frames with foundation or foundationless frames. And there's other methods that use equipment such as slatted bottom boards, inner covers, and queen excluders. The easiest method is opening the brood nest. This is simply done by removing a frame or two of brood. The removal of brood frames will decrease your population for a short period, gives the queen more space to lay, allows more room for the bees, and shocks them back into their regular routines. Strong hives with well-populated brood frames and good laying patterns should be watched more carefully for swarm cells or considered for removing some brood frames when there's more than 3 deep brood frames in a 10-frame story and a half, more than 6 medium brood frames of brood in a 10-frame triple medium. Now, there's many variables that depend on a hive buildup, such as mites, foraging capabilities, and weather, etc. And so these are just hives that you should probably just keep an eye on if you're in an intense nectar flow. And this is obviously a hive that needs to be thinned out. And usually when I talk to people, everybody has a different idea of how many bees they have in a hive or what is considered a lot of bees. This is, without a doubt, a lot of bees. This needs to be thinned out. This was one of my strong hives, and now this was during a nectar flow. I have my honey supers on. I inspected this hive. It had queen cells on 6 different brood frames. So I had to remove those brood frames out of that hive, and then I cut those queen cells off, and I put them in a weaker hive. I came back the next week. She filled up all of those brood frames that I removed and replaced with drunk comb. She filled that all back up. So she was an awesome queen. But every week when you're doing your inspections, you need to be, and it's a judgment call, you need to look at them and be like, okay, is there a lot of bees in here? Is there a lot of kept brood? A lot of brood? Does she still have space? And so it's like, again, it's a judgment call. You can make a nuclear split with the brood frames that you removed from the hive, or you can help a weaker colony out by adding the removed brood frames to it. This is always my first option. There are a lot of people that say you shouldn't coddle weak hives or weak bees, but you're always going to have colonies that are just lagging a little bit, especially if you have package bees or nukes that's just starting out. And so that's not considered, a genetically weak hive. That's a hive that's just starting out. So my philosophy is don't create more hives that you have to take care of. Take care of the bees that you have, rather than creating new hives. So that's my philosophy on that. And you can put those brood frames in a weaker colony. You don't want to remove the nurse or worker bees from the brood frames. The nurse bees are going to be the bees that cling to the brood frames. The foragers are going to be flying off of the frames. Those nurse bees need to stay on those frames to take care of the brood. And you can replace the brood with empty drone comb cells. And you want to use good comb and that doesn't have a lot of drone cells in it. And during strong nectar flows, you should be inspecting your hives every 7 days for swarm behavior and signs. 7 days, you can stay ahead of that 8th day when that queen cell gets capped. And you can inspect every 7 to 10 days out of nectar flows. These are methods that don't work. Queen clipping. This is when you clip one of the queen's wings so that she can't fly. And the workers might kill the queen trying to get her to fly with the swarm. Again, they get really nasty with her and they don't understand why she can't fly, and they might end up killing her in the process. And most of the time, they herd her onto the ground, and again, she can't fly, they don't understand it, and they'll just leave her on the ground. And then the bees might go back into the hive and just swarm with the virgin queen anyway. Adding more boxes. I've heard this a lot from beekeepers. They think they can just add more boxes and that's going to give them more room and everything's going to be fine. Adding more boxes, it may temporarily help with swarm prevention, but it usually only delays the inevitable. It's called a brood nest for a reason. She's down there just like a broken record laying, and she might go up in those boxes, but by that time it's too late because the nurse bees are the ones that are down there, and they realize that she's out of room, and they're like, "Oh crap, she's running out of room delay. So we need to make swarm preparations. We need to get out of here." So they're going to start queen cells, and once they start those queen cells, that's it. They're in swarm mode. So adding boxes, that's only going to make a little hotel room maybe for the foragers, and it might alleviate the congestion in the brood boxes, but it's still not really solving the problem, which is freeing up the brood area, the brood boxes down below. And adding more boxes can only invite wax moths because bees like to huddle together. And so they might not always go up in those upper boxes. And so those upper boxes can be undefended, and wax moths are just going to come in. You do want to add more supers during intense nectar flow because they're going to be bringing in nectar, making honey, and you don't want to get honey bound and down in those brood boxes. So adding your honey supers on there will allow them to store the honey in those supers. Swarm control. If you find church or cap queen cells, cap cells, before removing the frames and cutting off the cells, you want to be sure that the hive hasn't already swarmed and the original queen is still present. So you just don't want to go hacking off queen cells because they might have already swarmed, the original queen is gone, and then you've just left them without a way to queen themselves. And so you really want to take a look at these queen cells to see if any queen has emerged. And if a queen has emerged, you'll see like a little hatch that's been open on it, and then that cell will be empty, and that is a good indication that the hive may have already swarmed. A virgin queen has emerged, and the old queen it might be gone. And you want to remove the brood frames, and you want to replace them with drawn comb. Just cutting off the queen cells and replacing that frame doesn't work. They're already on the path to swarm, especially if the cells are capped, and there's pheromones that are still present on those brood frames, and you aren't relieving the original problem, which is congestion in the brood nest. There's no room for her to lay. So by removing those frames and getting it out of there and putting in new drawn comb, you're giving her room to lay, and then it's back to business as usual. And you can replace the frames with cells in a nuke or a split and let them queen themselves. Or you can cut the queen cells off and queen with a new queen in a nuke or split. Or you can cut the queen cells off and place those frames in a weaker colony. Again, don't remove the nurse bees from the frames, the brood frames. They need to stay on the frames to keep that nurse or the brood warm and tend to the brood. Final notes. Swarming does provide brood breaks, which are good for varroa control. However, the parent colony is weak and has a lot of kept brood, and usually it's lots of drone brood because remember, she stopped laying and she tended to lay a lot more drone brood, and that's ready to emerge with varroa. So the parent colony might have a really heavy infestation of varroa mite and have a low population, and so therefore they can't control the varroa problem as well. And most are young workers leaving with the swarm, and that can be damaging to the brood in the parent colony because there's no nurse bees there to take care of that brood in the parent colony. So responsible beekeepers should not let their hives swarm, especially for people that might live in developments or in town, close to public places, because sometimes the public can really freak out when they see swarms. And you want to keep your bees at home. It is a good sign, that the bees are doing so well that they are able to swarm, but really you don't want them to swarm really because you're going to lose, most of your bees and most of your honey. And if that happens before a nectar flow, then that is just going to totally mess up your nectar flow. And, I hear a lot of people that they, I caught swarms and I'm so happy. And I'm like, well, were they yours? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, congratulations, you just caught your own bees. And then sometimes that's a feat within itself, because a lot of times they like to swarm when you're not home or at work or whatever, or the swarm might be 20 feet in a tree. So collecting your own swarms, that can be a feat within itself. But the whole trick to swarm prevention is to get to the bees before they get in that swarm mode. And that is just simply, doing your regular inspections, staying on a 7-day inspection schedule, and just simply removing a frame or two of brood. And that will help keep them in check, every week. And then, you can give that to a weaker colony. So you're helping two colonies out at one time. You're keeping the one hive from swarming, and then you're boosting the population up of another hive. This concludes my presentation on swarming. If you have any questions, you can email me at info@eversweetapiaries.com. Check out our website, eversweetapiaries.com, or message me on Facebook, facebook.com/eversweetapiaries.